Wherever I've lived, I've always delved into the history of the place and acquainted myself with all that the immediate environment has to offer. I put down roots, and those roots established me in a place where I could lay a stable ground from where I could look outwards to paint, write, or create music. Back in school, some of us would volunteer for one afternoon a week to visit patients at the local psychiatric hospital. It was a huge Victorian edifice on the Downs, built in 1877. I liked it. I liked the people, and I liked hearing their stories. I always found the elderly so much more interesting than my own contemporaries. Some years later, when I had left school, I saw that there was an opportunity to work full-time at the hospital. I jumped at the chance. It was only a cleaning job, but I really enjoyed it. I applied for a room in the staff hostel, and pretty soon I was given a small room on the ground floor where other ancillary staff lived. This was room 6. It was my whole world. From there I orchestrated my creative life, painting little watercolours of the hospital grounds. It was a small room, but I crammed everything into it, from my guitars to my cookery books. I regularly held parties within the grounds of the hostel, draping the staff table tennis table with a huge bedspread, and around which an assortment of friends would gather. The surrounding countryside was still quite rural. There were cows in the next field. The hospital was, in many ways, quite isolated. It was located on the top of a hill between two urban settlements and enclosed by a high perimeter wall. I would often see patients, still in their dressing gowns, approach the threshold of the main entrance, view the world outside, and retreat. For me, it was a kind of idyll. I met some really extraordinary people with amazing stories, not among the staff, but among the patients. After a few weeks, I was given my own ward to clean regularly, so I was able to get to know some of the patients better. I filled my diary and wrote stories about them, including this chap, Patrick, whose jacket pockets were stuffed with various tobacco tins, filled with coffee powder, sugar, and cigarette ends he was able to filch from the cafeteria. The patients trusted me, as I was not the one administering medicine. My time spent there was one of the most profound years of my working life. Later, in 1989, much of the hospital was demolished, and what remained became a closed category prison. The high perimeter wall acquired another layer. The staff hostel and room 6 became surrounded by barbed wire, and where I held my parties was built over. My first home now excluded the curious gaze. For 9.5 years I lived in a bedsit, a first-floor single room in Islington. I was in good company. My brother had a room 2 doors down, and above him lived an Indian couple with whom I got acquainted and later formed a music ensemble. And just up the road once lived the 19th century music hall performer, Champagne Charlie. It was a nice room. I liked that the function of the room was always in flux. It was a kitchen, a bedroom, a living room, a studio, and a room for parties. I was always amazed at just how many people I could cram into this room. I made a folding screen with a fish motif, which changed the shape of the space in the room. The walls had 4 different designs of wallpaper distributed unevenly, obviously all end of stock, so naturally I tried to cover up as much of it as possible. With a good friend, we created this picnic scene with leaves and paper, much to the annoyance of my landlord. I printed curtains, painted and decorated furniture, and made them the subject of little watercolour pictures, as well as my collection of medieval tile fragments gathered from the Thames at low tide. I made drawings with light. The 80s was a period of economic boom. I longed to purchase a flat of my own, but increasingly saw how the rise in prices precluded my chance of buying my own place. That was until the downturn of the early 90s. And here is the first place that I could really call my home, as a homeowner, though I never quite felt a sense of belonging. I remember back in the late 80s taking the Underground out to almost the furthest extremes that the Central Line would take me out of the city, and visiting an estate agent on a Sunday. In those days, estate agents worked every day. I showed them my bank statement and said, "This is what I earn, and this is what I've saved." It was not insubstantial. The lady in the estate agency looked at my figures and just said, "Forget it." I left thinking that I'd missed my chance to get on the property ladder. However, by the early 90s, the market had changed direction, and in 1992, I was able to purchase an ex-council flat from the previous council tenants. 25 Wimborne Court was a blank canvas. Inspired by my love of the Amiga Workshop ethos, I gradually embellished the flat with decorations. Not simply paintings on the wall, but I ate from plates of my own design, on a table that I'd bought at an auction and decorated with a goldfish motif. I slept under a bedspread of my own printing, inspired by some rubbings I'd made of the chevron pattern of the concrete piles I'd made while recording the construction of the National Gallery's Sainsbury wing from 1988 to 91. I slept in a room with wallpaper of my own stenciling. I kept diaries and letters in a handmade box with an inscription echoing a poem from my favourite film.
Not heaven itself upon the past has power, But what has been, and I have had my hour.
And on the tiny balcony, I cultivated herbs for cooking and oak trees from acorns. This was a time of innocence. I see myself in those early days and wonder really how I got to where I am now. How certain events in the so-called Balkans knocked me off my axis and changed the trajectory of my life.